In the mid-1990s, communities north of Durban woke to an unfolding pattern of disappearances that would stretch months and years, that would leave families searching and police investigating, that would expose vulnerabilities and force a conversation about protection, justice, and the realities of everyday survival. This program tells that story. The experiences of families who lost loved ones, the work of investigators who pursued leads across precincts, the role of community intelligence that altered the course of inquiry, and the longer arc of social and institutional response that followed. Phoenix and the surrounding communities were places of ordinary life shaped by work, kinship, and routine. People left early to stand in taxi ranks, to take casual labor, to accept kitchen work or domestic shifts. In the 1990s, with the broader social transition underway across the country, economic opportunity did not expand evenly. For many households, every day offered choices that weighed risk against need. Young women frequently moved through informal employment networks. They accepted offers based on word of mouth, neighborly introductions, or short-term opportunities that promised a day's wage. Those same networks, which sustained community life, also created openings for exploitation when unscrupulous. Actors used offers of work as a lure. The women at the center of this story were known to their families by name. Daughters who made morning porridge and left to seek work. Women who planned for school fees and small improvements to a home. Friends who socialized at market stalls and cared for neighbors. Children when needed. Describing their lives in practical detail is an act of humanization that matters. These were the people whose absence created a ripple effect across homes and neighborhoods. When a family noticed that someone had not returned, a familiar, painful routine often followed. Immediate steps were practical and urgent. Calls to friends and employers, visits to clinics and hospitals, checks with landlords and local shops, questions posed at taxi ranks and bus stops. Families spread the word slowly at first, hoping for a simple explanation, an extra shift, a delayed return. As hours became days and then weeks, uncertainty hardened into fear. Missing person posters appeared on walls, poles, and inside community halls. Candlelit vigils were held to gather neighbors, to pool memory, to sustain search. At the institutional level, each disappearance triggered a formal response. A missing person report, a police log entry, sometimes a formal search. At first, each case was processed as an individual tragedy. But patterns began to appear. A cluster of cases in neighboring suburbs began to share characteristics that were too consistent to be purely coincidental. Many victims were last seen near transit nodes, taxi ranks, and informal pickup points, or reported as accepting offers of work or transport from people they had not known before. Time windows often overlapped. Routes to employment or the edge of urban settlements appeared repeatedly in timelines. Those overlapping details shifted the investigative lens. Reporters and concerned citizens started to compare notes. Families spoke in hushed clusters about similar circumstances. Editors published repeated accounts. Public attention grew, and that attention brought pressure to coordinate investigative efforts across jurisdictions that had previously operated more independently. Police faced a difficult and resource-intense task. Multiple missing person reports coming from different precincts required urgent triage. Investigators had to balance the immediate needs of active searches with the long-term work of connecting seemingly isolated incidents. Limited forensic capacity, heavy caseloads, and the logistical challenges of coordinating across administrative boundaries complicated early responses. Investigators adopted a process of prioritization based on risk assessment, the recency of the disappearance, the reported circumstances of the last sighting, the age and vulnerability of the missing person, and any available witness statements. Those initial decisions shaped the allocation of personnel, whether additional units were called in, and when forensic teams would be deployed. The interplay between police work and community knowledge became central to the investigation's progress. Neighbors, friends, and sometimes people who had been close to the eventual suspect provided tips, small details that on their own might have seemed trivial, but when combined with other information formed a compelling mosaic. A remembered vehicle description, a partial license number, the recollection of a phrase used to persuade a victim, or a habit of loitering near a sugarcane edge. All of these contributed to a narrowing of focus. Forensic analysis amplified those leads where trace evidence could be recovered. Technicians handled evidence with methodical care, sealing items, documenting chain of custody, photographing materials, and sending samples to labs for comparison. Even when forensic resources were constrained, careful preservation and methodical cataloging made it possible to test hypotheses later in the process. Behavioral analysis provided another strand. Investigators and profiling specialists looked for consistent choices made by a potential offender, methods of approach, the language or promises used, victim selection criteria, and preferred locations. A consistent modus operandi, if demonstrable, allowed separate cases to be treated as part of an interconnected pattern rather than as isolated tragedies. Building that profile did not rely solely on hard forensics. It relied on accumulated witness descriptions, patterns in victim demographics, and observed movement corridors. Community members often bore the cost of providing information. Speaking up could be risky. Fear of reprisal or of being drawn into complex legal processes made some reluctant to come forward, yet many did, motivated by a desire to protect other families and to help investigators stop further harm. Tip lines collected an array of information, which investigators then cross-checked and verified before acting. The process of converting community tips into actionable intelligence required patience and care. Some leads were false starts, some revealed innocent explanations, and others validated long-held fears. Months of piecing together disparate leads, reconciling witness statements, re-examining timelines, and following up on forensic possibilities culminated in coordinated operations designed to arrest and detain a suspect while preserving evidence. Planning an operation required judicial authorization in the form of warrants and careful operational coordination to ensure the safety of officers and the integrity of physical material. The arrest itself was never an endpoint. Once a suspect was detained, investigators faced the demanding task of correlating their evidence with specific incidents, of demonstrating linkage across multiple occurrences, and of protecting witnesses whose testimony could be essential. Prosecutors then built a cumulative case intended to show, beyond reasonable doubt, that the incidents were connected by consistent behavior, that the defendant had opportunities and means, and that physical or testimonial evidence supported the charges. Preparing a case that draws on pattern evidence poses distinct legal challenges. Courts must guard against unfair prejudice, the risk that jurors will assume guilt simply because multiple incidents are discussed, while allowing the prosecution to explain how discrete events are reasonably linked. Issues of admissibility, chain of custody, and the reliability of memory are contested during pre-trial motions and hearings. Defense counsel commonly challenges the probative value of pattern evidence, the conclusiveness of forensic links, and the credibility of recollections that may have been formed under stress or after substantial time. In this contested arena, the trial becomes a careful exercise in parsing narrative into legally admissible facts. Witness testimony plays a central role in that process. For family members and last-seen witnesses, recounting memory requires courage. The courtroom demands specificity and composure. Forensic witnesses translate laboratory findings into language that can be understood and evaluated by jurors. Investigators provide chronology and context. The court balances contested narratives with judicial instructions designed to protect fairness, reminding jurors to weigh each piece of evidence on its demonstrated merits. When the verdict was delivered in the courtroom, it represented the legal system's determination based on the evidence presented. For families, the verdict offered a formal acknowledgement of accountability, although it could not fill the personal void created by loss. Sentencing reflected both specific culpability and degrees of harm, and its practical effect was to remove a dangerous individual from the community, at least for the period specified by law. Beyond the courtroom, the case reverberated through families and neighborhoods in quieter, long-term ways. Grief continued as anniversaries arrived, and as ordinary life demanded engagement with work, school, and social obligations. Support networks, friends, faith communities, local advocates played a continued role in sustaining families. Many survivors and grieving relatives found counseling helpful. Peer support groups offered a space to share memory and practical Strategies for coping with ongoing absence. The case spurred institutional introspection. Police agencies reviewed protocols for missing person reports and cross-jurisdictional cooperation. Recommendations emerged for more reliable communication, channels between precincts, for standardized missing person databases that could reveal patterns sooner, and for investment in forensic capacity to reduce delays in analyzing physical evidence. Policy discussions also focused on victim-centered policing, ensuring that families received consistent updates, that interviews were conducted with trauma sensitivity, and that witness protection mechanisms were available when necessary. Community-based prevention and advocacy evolved alongside institutional reforms. Recognizing that many victims had been lured by offers of work, local organizations developed outreach programs, teaching safer job-seeking practices. Workshops encouraged community accompaniment for people attending unfamiliar job interviews, advocated for verifying employers through trusted local liaisons, and promoted the use of public or group travel to reduce solitary exposure. Hotlines and reporting pathways were publicized, offering discreet channels to flag suspicious offers and to request assistance. These efforts aimed to be practical and grounded in local realities. They did not advise withdrawal from labor markets, but rather sought to reduce vulnerability by building trusted communal systems. The larger social dynamics at play were impossible to ignore. Economic precarity shaped choices, and informal labor markets created environments where quick opportunities were sometimes the only option. Addressing vulnerability therefore required not only law enforcement, but also social investment, job creation, skills training, economic supports, and programs that reduce the pressure on households to accept risky offers. In this sense, prevention is intersectoral, linking criminal justice to social policy and community development. Throughout the investigation and the aftermath, the dignity of victims and the concerns of their families demanded centrality. Media coverage that prioritized human storylines over sensational detail helped maintain focus on the human cost rather than on lurid curiosity. Journalists who adhered to careful ethical standards offered families a means to keep public attention on unresolved issues while protecting privacy and dignity. Legal and mental health professionals underscored the importance of trauma-informed practices in interviews and courtroom testimony so that survivors and family members were not further harmed by the processes meant to deliver justice. The case left a complicated legacy. On the one hand, it demonstrated that persistent investigative work, coupled with community cooperation and forensic effort, could lead to accountability. On the other hand, it exposed gaps, resource limitations, procedural delays, and social conditions that left people vulnerable, that persisted beyond a single conviction. For reformers, the lesson was clear. Convictions matter, but they must be paired with sustained, structural investments to make communities safer in everyday life. The human stories that emerged from the case remain the most important element. Family members described the daily work of remembering, rituals, photographs, small acts that kept memory alive. Neighbors recounted ways they altered routine to protect one another, walking in groups, creating local check-in systems, or forming informal escort networks to accompany those traveling to distant job sites. Community leaders spoke about the moral responsibility to support bereaved families and to use painful experience as a catalyst for change. The legal community reflected on lessons learned about presenting complex pattern evidence in court and about the need for robust chain of custody procedures. Forensic teams documented the gaps in capacity at the time and advocated for sustained funding for laboratory upgrades, training, and regional collaboration that could reduce evidentiary delays in future cases. Policy advocates called for integrated responses, improved reporting systems that are accessible and trusted, social supports that reduce immediate economic desperation, and prevention initiatives that are community-based and culturally sensitive. Those advocating for victims argued consistently for long-term counseling resources, for mechanisms that ensure families receive regular updates from policing agencies, and for legal supports to navigate the complexities of trials and post-conviction processes. In communities, a range of practical measures took root. Job safety workshops taught simple verification steps, asking for written contact information from potential employers, checking references through community networks, and arranging to travel with a known companion to first meetings. Local committees formed to vet employment leads and to provide quick response assistance when a family reported someone missing. These community-led actions were not panaceas. They were responses adapted to local circumstances that aimed to reduce risk. The moral and civic energies that followed the case extended into educational campaigns in schools and community centers, where young people learned about situational awareness, the importance of trusted accompaniment, and how to use reporting channels. Community centers partnered with local employers to create more visible and reliable hiring practices, helping to formalize opportunities that otherwise pass through informal channels. Importantly, advocates emphasized respect for autonomy. The goal was not to police the choices of women seeking work, but to provide safer, more reliable pathways to opportunity, and to ensure that when something went wrong, there were responsive systems to act quickly. The institutional changes recommended and, in some instances, implemented included improved interagency communication protocols, standardized missing person case management systems, and enhanced resources for victim services. Some police departments adopted dedicated liaison roles to keep families informed and to coordinate with community groups. NGOs and government programs expanded counseling services and developed outreach programs tailored to those most at risk. The long arc of reform remains ongoing. Structural change is slow and requires sustained funding, political will, and community engagement. The case thus serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to persistent action. Legal accountability must be matched by social supports and by mechanisms that reduce the vulnerability that enabled predation in the first place. For families, healing has been uneven and deeply personal. Some found meaning in advocacy, channeling grief into work, supporting others, and educating communities. Others preferred quiet remembrance and private rituals that sustained daily life. Support networks adapted to provide practical assistance, including help with legal paperwork, with memorial arrangements, and with accessing social services, which eased some burdens even as emotional scars remained. The civic response also included memorialization, small community spaces dedicated to memory, public events that kept the stories of victims present in communal life, and educational memorials that linked remembrance to prevention. In the final assessment, the story of these crimes is not reducible to a single sentence or legal judgment. It is a layered account of lived vulnerability and trust, of investigative persistence, of community courage to speak and to demand action, and of the slow, ongoing work of transformation across policing, policy, and communal practice. Accountability in court was one necessary element. Prevention, support, and structural change are the longer project. Remembering the victims is the ethical core of this work. To name them, to listen to families, to center their needs in reform proposals, these are acts that demand more than occasional attention. They ask for sustained public commitment. If you are someone affected by these issues, if you have lost a loved one, if you are supporting someone who is missing, or if you have been harmed, the availability of services matters. Reach out to local victim support, organizations and helplines that offer trauma-informed counseling, legal guidance, and practical assistance. For those watching, consider supporting community prevention initiatives, volunteering with local groups that offer verification services for job seekers, or advocating for sustained investment in forensic and social service capacity. This case remains a painful chapter in a larger story about vulnerability, justice, and resilience. It asks institutions to do better and communities to care for one another in practical ways. It honors those lost by insisting on memory, on action, and on quiet, persistent efforts to protect one another. The stories recounted here are not just about crimes and convictions. They are about families and the work of reconstruction after grievous loss. They are about neighbors who learned to watch for one another and about professionals who adapted their practices to be more sensitive to trauma. They are about systems that must be made more robust to prevent similar tragedies. The legal conclusion of a case provides a measure of accountability, but it is not a culmination. The work of prevention, of supporting survivors, and of strengthening institutional responses continues. This narrative is an invitation to remember, to support, and to act in ways that reduce vulnerability and strengthen communal life. If you or someone you know needs help related to sexual violence or a missing person, Please contact local support services and helplines. You are not alone.
This is Whispers in Africa. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the true crime documentary. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and turn on the notification bell icon, so you'll be notified when we upload a new video. You can also tell us what you think about this documentary in the comments section. I hope to see you in our next video. Bye.